Hello everyone, my name is Gull and I'm doing my PhD in spontaneous metacognitive experiences supervised by Chris Mula and Sunil Suchet. I welcome you all to my thesis defense. I extend my welcome to esteemed jury members. Without further ado, let's dive into my thesis defense. But before jumping into what is spontaneous metacognition, okay. So before jumping into what is spontaneous metacognition, I would like to give you a very real quick overview of what is metacognition. And for that, I would like you to imagine that you're reading a research article and it's quite dense and heavy, and you reach a section which is even denser than you imagine. And for there, you take a pause for a second and you deliberately evaluate your comprehension level and ask yourself, did I understand this section clearly? So this is a very classic day-to-day example of what is metacognition. However, sometimes metacognition occurs more spontaneously without any deliberation, more automatically, and it can be in the form of having a déjà vu experience or having a word on your tip of the tongue. One of the goals of my thesis was to draw a distinction between metacognitive judgments, which are controlled, more deliberate, sought for. But metacognition is not just about these conscious judgments and evaluations. Sometimes it occurs in the form of metacognitive experiences, which are more automatic. Nonetheless, they are epistemically motivated feelings. You cannot decide to have a déjà vu experience. These are not sought for, but it occurs whenever something goes wrong. So whenever something goes wrong, whenever there is a discrepancy between what was expected to happen and what actually happens, it gives rise to a surprise and feeling of familiarity. That feeling of familiarity is just a reaction to the perception that something went wrong in the processing of the current event. And when such discrepancy occurs, it gives rise to a conscious state of metacognition, more automatically, spontaneously. And again, it can be in the form of having a déjà vu experience or having a word on your tip of the tongue. In my thesis, I'm studying spontaneous metacognitive experiences like déjà vu, which is a false feeling of familiarity towards unfamiliar stimuli. Jamais vu, which is a false feeling of unfamiliarity towards a familiar stimuli. Tip of the tongue, which is a feeling that you have a piece of information, the recall is imminent, but it's temporarily blocked. Error detection, it's like identifying your error instantly after it has occurred. And in addition to these spontaneous metacognitive experiences, I studied some spontaneous thoughts, including involuntary memories, which is spontaneous or unintentional retrieval of personal past memories. And additionally, I studied zoning out, which is a feeling that you are trying to concentrate on something, but your mind has been elsewhere entirely. The spontaneous metacognitive experiences that I'm studying in my thesis, they share certain key characteristics. For example, they are unintentional. They signal conflict or mismatch, and they further lead to cognitive evaluation or behavioral adjustment. And the spontaneous thoughts, such as involuntary memory zoning out, they are not metacognitive. Nonetheless, they also occur unintentionally. They also include internal monitoring and awareness processes. So studying these experiences together allow us to explore if the broader metacognitive monitoring processes also underpin other types of spontaneous experiences. Here, I would like to draw on the current debate in the metacognition research, questioning whether metacognition is domain general or it's domain specific. Now, what do I mean by that? Researchers in the favor of domain general, they propose that individuals rely on common resources to monitor their thoughts, perception, memory, their cognitive tasks. Whereas researchers who favor domain specific, they argue that metacognition monitoring processes operate independently within each cognitive domain. The idea is that we are exploring if the spontaneous metacognitive experiences in my that I'm studying in my thesis could reflect metacognition domain general approach, and if it can be extended to other types of spontaneous experiences. And this view is theoretically supported by the proposed overlapping cognitive characteristics as well as neural circuits such as medial temporal lobe, prefrontal cortex, anterior cingulate cortex, which are crucial for memory retrieval, spontaneous thoughts process, conflict monitoring, and metacognitive regulation. So if metacognition is domain general, we would assume that people who have one type of spontaneous metacognitive experience, they would also likely to have other types of spontaneous metacognitive experiences. And studies have shown that spontaneous metacognitive experiences like déjà vu are correlated with the frequency of jamais vu experience, TOT, and even involuntary autobiographical memory. So the research that I did in my thesis is the first research ever in which we are studying all these as measurements together. This is the, at least to the best of my knowledge, it is the first time that all of these spontaneous metacognitive experiences in relation to spontaneous thoughts are being studied together. So we are trying to explore to what extent these strange subjective experiences are related to each other. So we are exploring if they are associated with each other, how frequently do people experience these phenomena in their daily life? Do these experiences share certain phenomenological characteristics? Are there any cultural differences in experiencing as well as reporting of these phenomena? Here is the visual representation of my PhD thesis. So the first online study, which was a large online questionnaire, is the building block of my thesis, and the other study stems from it. So in study 2, we analyzed the qualitative data that we received in our study 1. In study 3, we explore all these measurements from a neurological perspective and more specifically in patients with epilepsy. And in study 4, we try to provoke all these experiences in one laboratory experiment using a paradigm that typically generates involuntary memories. Here, I would like to emphasize that I will not be going into much details of study 2 and study 3 because of the time constraint. So I will see how it goes. So in study 1, in line with the previous researches, we used retrospective questionnaire to explore the frequency and association between these experiences. Previously, as mentioned, that these experiences have been studied either separately or in pair and not together. So this is the first time we have included all these experiences together in one large online questionnaire using consistent definitions, and we explore if they are culturally different from each, if there are certain cultural differences, and if these experiences are associated with certain religious or spiritual aspects. Here, I would like to emphasize that we are using déjà vu and theory as a reference experience because they have the literature in these measurements is more developed in the terms of age, education, and culture. For example, studies have shown that déjà vu decreases with the age, whereas TOT increases with the age. Studies also show that the more educated a person is, the more they are likely to report déjà vu experiences as well as TOT experiences. Furthermore, déjà vu and TOT both have been studied from a cultural perspective in a number of non-English speaking countries. Déjà vu previously has been included among the paranormal items and have been associated with unempirical concepts such as extrasensory perception and reincarnation. So in the current study, we basically explore if the pattern that has been observed in these reference experiences can be extended to the other less explored experiences. We hypothesize that the cultural differences in reporting of these experiences would partly be based on the conceptual familiarity and labeling. People who are more religious or spiritual, they are likely to report these experiences more frequently. And participants would generally report these experiences as occurring suddenly, having short duration, and being more significant rather than just a random event. We collected data from France, Poland, and Pakistan, and the questionnaire that we used was translated in 4 different languages. Oh, sorry. No. Great. So this is the layout of our questionnaire. The questionnaire had different sections. In the first section, we just presented the terminology. For example, we asked the participant, have you ever experienced déjà vu? They had to respond either with yes, no, or I don't know. And in the second section, we provided the definition and then again asked the participants, have you ever experienced this phenomena, yes or no? And if the participants said yes, they would provide the frequency with which they had the experiences. And if they said no, they would move on to the next question. Total 860 participants participated in this study. Their mean age was around 22 years old. From France, total 178 participants. From Poland, 312, and from Pakistan, total 370 participants participated in the study. This table shows the incidence reporting of these 6 experiences. I will go column by column. So in the first column, we see the people who responded to don't know item. So you can see that people reported having jamais. Almost half of the participants said they don't know if they have ever experienced jamais. Similarly, it was the same for the error detection. We assume that these are the people who did not know how to respond to it because they did not understand what the phenomena is, what it actually entails. So before the definition, we see that the most commonly reported experiences were déjà vu and TOT, and nearly half of the participants, only half of the participants said that they ever had jamais vu experience. However, once the definition was provided, we see that the incidence reporting increased for almost all of the experiences except for déjà vu and TOT. We assume that once participants read the definition, they were able to understand the phenomena more clearly and were more able to accurately or retrospectively estimate if they have ever experienced this phenomena in their life. I will not spend too much time on this slide, but basically it shows that the people who have had the experience, they showed high level of agreement with the definitions that we use in our questionnaire. But later on, we can come back to it if you have any questions. So we found that there are significant differences in how frequently these phenomena are experienced. Zoning out was the most frequently experienced phenomena or frequently reported phenomena. It was more frequent than tip of the tongue and IAMs, which were more frequent than error detection, déjà vu, jamais vu. Error detection was slightly more frequent than déjà vu and jamais vu, but they did not significantly differ from each other. Further, our data showed that everything correlated with everything. So this means that if a person has déjà vu or jamais vu experience, they are also likely to experience spontaneous thoughts such as involuntary memory and zoning out. And we also found cultural differences, with Pakistani group being the group that reported a significantly low incidence as well as frequency of these phenomena. And this is clearly shown in the graph presented here. For the experience of jamais vu, we can see that Poland also reported very low frequency, even lower than Pakistan, but overall the frequency comparison between France and Poland were almost same, and overall Pakistani group reported lower frequency and incidence of these phenomena. For the religiosity and spirituality, we found that the more religious or spiritual a person is, the less likely they are to experience these phenomena. We did not find any significant correlation with any of the demographic variables. In our questionnaire, we further asked our participants to classify these phenomena on the basis of certain phenomenological characteristics. We asked them to classify in the terms of their duration, control, onset, pleasantness, and significance. Consistently, participants reported having experiences like déjà vu, jamais vu, without any control and sudden onset, and also random. Similarly, participants reported that experiences like IAM and error detection, they occur suddenly, whereas experiences like zoning out, they have longer duration and occur gradually. So in conclusion, if a person has spontaneous metacognitive experiences like déjà vu or jamais vu, they are also likely to experience spontaneous thoughts such as zoning out and involuntary memory. And they do share certain phenomenological characteristics in the terms of being spontaneous, having brief duration, and lack of control. And we did find cultural differences with Pakistani group reporting lower incidence as well as frequency of these phenomena. In our study one, we received subjective description of all these 6 experiences, and the qualitative data that we received in our study one, we analyzed it in study two using a large language model. So for example, if I show you some subjective descriptions here and ask you after reading this description, what do you think it corresponds to? Either it corresponds to déjà vu, TOT, jamais vu, and so on. So similar to this, we did experimentation with human participants and ChatGPT. So basically, we designed an online questionnaire in which we included 70 descriptions, 10 for each experience, plus 10 control statements. And these descriptions did not include keywords such as déjà vu, jamais vu, to give away that they are dead along this type of experience. And we asked participants to categorize or classify or recover the correct label. And we did the same thing with ChatGPT with different versions, and we had multiple experimentation with ChatGPT. I will not go into the details of the results, and I'm so sorry, it's blurry. It wasn't yesterday. But I would like to emphasize that both ChatGPT and human responses, they were similar to each other. They both were able to recover correct labels for these descriptions. However, for the descriptions related to jamais vu, human participants were better able in identifying those descriptions as compared to ChatGPT. So like I said, that the accuracy rate of both human participant and ChatGPT was almost similar, whereas ChatGPT was more accurate in recovering labels for TOT descriptions, and human beings were more accurate in recovering labels for jamais vu. The struggle of ChatGPT in classifying jamais vu tell us that it may lack the training data set in the terms of jamais vu literature. Nonetheless, we can say that ChatGPT can be a useful tool in summarizing or analyzing such laborious qualitative data as its classification and evaluation aligns with the human participant. But seeing that it struggled with experiences like jamais vu, it shows that such subjective experiences come with more variability. Moving on to study 3, we explored all these 6 experiences in patients with epilepsy. Studies have shown that experiences like déjà vu and jamais vu are associated in patients suffering from temporal lobe epilepsy. Researchers argue that patients with temporal lobe epilepsy, the déjà vu that they experience just before their seizure is due to the abnormal stimulation of temporal lobe areas. Barzakowski and Mula, they suggest that individuals experiencing temporal lobe epilepsy, if they have frequent déjà vu experiences, they are also likely to report high frequency of involuntary memories. Furthermore, experiences like TOT, high reports of TOT has been observed in patients with temporal lobe epilepsy. So we hypothesize that participants who report one type of phenomena more frequently, they are also likely to report other type of phenomena more frequently as well. However, this is a more exploratory hypothesis, so we cannot be sure that everything will be related to each other or every phenomena will relate to each other. We further hypothesize that epilepsy group is likely to report high frequency of these phenomena. This hypothesis is actually based on very small number of studies that suggest that patients with epilepsy may report high frequency of déjà vu, but this pattern hasn't always been found. So we had 96 non-clinical participants, and we had 71 patients diagnosed with epilepsy. And our results showed that epilepsy group reported lower frequency as well as incidence of these phenomena. And more particularly, they reported lower frequency of jamais, error detection, IAM, and zoning out. There were group differences in categorizing or classifying these phenomena. However, I'm just going to present here what both groups agreed on. So both groups agreed on that experiences like déjà vu, jamais vu, IAM, TOT, and zoning out, they are unpredictable and have sudden onset, suggesting that despite their surface level differences, they are perceived as arising spontaneously and without any deliberate effort, and they may arise from common triggering conditions. Further, we found that the frequency of spontaneous metacognitive experiences correlated with spontaneous thoughts in only non-clinical samples. We did not find the same pattern in epilepsy group. In both groups, we did not find any association with demographic variables. So there are group differences in experiencing and reporting these phenomena, and epilepsy group was the one that reported lower frequency and incidence. Some patients even reported having a very high frequency of these phenomena. For example, one patient reported, some of the patients reported having more than 100 frequency of these phenomena, and they had a very unique classification of these experiences. However, due to lack of information about the seizure frequency or epileptic foci, we were unable to draw any specific conclusion. But if metacognition is domain general, having a certain neurological condition may disrupt the underlying associations. So in study 4, we attempted to provoke these 6 experiences using a paradigm that typically generates involuntary memory. So recently, Barbekovsky and Muller published a research article in which they proposed that spontaneous metacognitive experiences like déjà vu and spontaneous thoughts like IAMs, they are related. They share certain cognitive processes on a continuum. Involuntary memory, which refers to content from personal past memories, déjà vu, which is feeling of false familiarity. Barbekovsky and Muller proposed that the process of retrieval and process of familiarity, they share certain neural correlates on continuum favoring an interaction between them. They further proposed that experimental paradigms that typically generate involuntary memory may also provoke déjà vu as well as other spontaneous metacognitive experiences. The paradigm that we use in our study was originally designed by Schlagman and Kvavilishvali. I will not go into much of the details, but the basic idea is participants engage in a vigilance task of detecting vertical lines in the stream of horizontal lines, and they have word phrases in the center of the screen that would generate involuntary memory. They had 800 trials. Recently, Barbekovsky with his colleague attempted replicated the methodology with the shorter version using 400 slides. And we took the inspiration from their version. So in our study, French undergraduate participants participated and they were compensated in the form of points for their participation. And we used PsychoPy to design the experiment. So our experiment design had 400 slides with 8 targeted slides with vertical lines and 392 non-targeted slides with horizontal lines. In our experiment, we had both word stimuli as well as picture stimuli. We had French words and non-French words, and we had familiar and unfamiliar picture in a repetitive manner, which were exposed for like 4 seconds. The primary task of the participant was to press V button whenever they detected V on their screen. However, they were instructed to press a space bar on their keyboard whenever a thought comes to their mind. So whenever a thought came to participants' mind, they were directed to a response section while pausing the experiment. And in that section, they would answer a few questions like, was the thought related to what you just saw on the screen? Was it déjà vu, jamais vu, and so on? They also provided a phenomenological rating for whether the thought was spontaneous, how strong it was, and how focused were you on the task. Once they were done with the response section, they would hit the continue button and the experiment would continue. Total of 96 participants participated in the study. The average button press was approximately 29 times. Here is the general overview of the most reported experience during the experiment. Participants reported high frequency of, most of the participants reported involuntary memory. Participants also reported having déjà vu, jamais vu, zoning out. TOT was the least reported experience during the experiment. Here is the reporting of the experiment across different stimuli. I will not go into much of the detail, but I will only point out the most prominent result because of the shortage of time. So IAM was the most reported phenomena for both familiar pictures as well as unfamiliar pictures. And déjà vu was reported for both familiar pictures as well as unfamiliar pictures. Error detection occurred most often in response to non-words, but it was relatively infrequent. Zoning out was also infrequent, but it was distributed evenly across the stimuli. The correlation analysis showed that the lab frequency of déjà vu correlated with the jamais vu, TOT, and IAMs, which shows that if a person has déjà vu during the experiment, they are also likely to experience TOT and jamais vu and IAMs. It would be reassuring if the real-life frequency of the phenomena would correlate with the lab frequency of the phenomena, and we found these correlations, which shows that if a person has déjà vu in their real life, they are also likely to experience déjà vu during the experiment. After our experiment, we asked the participant to provide us a retrospective rating of how intense the phenomena is and compare it with the laboratory and real life. Participants reported that experiences like jamais vu, tip of the tongue, and error detection are more intense during the experiment, whereas involuntary memory is experienced more intensely in real life. We did not find any significant differences for zoning out and déjà vu. So a study paradigm that generates involuntary memories can also provoke déjà vu and possibly other spontaneous experiences. The idea is that when attention diffuses, the mind starts to wander. And as proposed by Barzykowski and Muller, the environmental cues that generate involuntary memories could also provoke déjà vu experiences, and as in our case of the experiment, possibly other spontaneous experiences as well. Previous experimental studies has mostly focused on the thought content, whereas in our study, we tried to explore or investigate the frequency of these phenomena in relation to each other and also identify their phenomenological characteristics. So across 4 studies, we found a consistent pattern of correlation, and we were also able to provoke these experiences in a laboratory setting. This provided us a broad overall scientific overview. Some of the phenomena were more frequent or more common. Zoning out and involuntary memories were consistently more frequent and most commonly occurring phenomena. We did find cultural differences, and Pakistani group was the one that reported low frequency and incidence of these experiences. However, we were unable to identify if these experiences were because of the language or association with religious groups. So maybe the future research could balance the sampling and pinpoint the cultural and contextual effects. The qualitative data that we received and analyzed with the help of AI models, we found that large language models like ChatGPT could be useful in analyzing such laborious data, as its evaluation aligned with the human participants provided us a concise view. However, its consistent struggle with jamais and control statements tell us that it might lack the training that is required to analyze or in order to analyze such subjective experiences that comes with more variability. So future research may be switched to other language models which have real-time access to updated literature. We further found that these experiences do share certain phenomenological characteristics. They are spontaneous, they occur suddenly, and they lack control. However, divergence observed in perceived awareness, emotional valence, and significant, especially between the epilepsy and non-clinical group, shows that having certain neurological condition may influence how these experiences are reported or perceived. And speaking of neurological aspects, spontaneous metacognitive experiences differ in a meaningful way in individuals with and without epilepsy. Future research could use mixed methodology, including qualitative interview and maybe experimental tasks, in addition to having physiological measurements such as EEG to identify the underlying neural correlates for these phenomena. Further, we want to emphasize that we cannot ignore demand characteristics. There is a possibility of response bias and all of that. Even though we use consistent definition providing what the phenomena entails, and the descriptions that we received in our data, most of them were reassuring, but we did come across some of the descriptions that made us wonder if participants truly understood what the phenomena is. So future research maybe could aim to refine the paradigm and validate the findings across diverse groups. So one of the central theoretical questions that we explored in this thesis was if metacognition is domain general and if it can be extended to other types of spontaneous thought. Throughout these studies, we found a consistent pattern of correlation showing that if a person has spontaneous metacognitive experiences such as déjà vu, jamais, may also experience spontaneous thoughts such as IAMs and zoning out. However, metacognition might be domain general, but having certain neurological condition may disrupt the underlying associations. So this thesis provides a multi-perspective examination of 6 spontaneous cognitive phenomena. This is the first time ever that all these 6 measurements have been studied together in order to investigate their frequency in relation to each other within the same participants across multiple methodological designs. And while these experiences have certain differences in their content and differences on their surface level, the studies across this thesis shows that they may reflect shared cognitive mechanisms. Thank you so much.